Hey y'all. I thought we would take a different approach to the stuff I want to talk about with Redux. I realized that um, it would be pretty difficult, or at least it would take a while to explain um, to like approach Redux the way that I want um, to gradually break things down, understand them in bits and pieces, um, and just take the time to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Um, we're gonna just in this video we're just gonna talk about what it is, where it comes from, the architectures that inspired it, talk about good use cases for it, talk about some of the benefits you get from using it, and then talk about the core design philosophy. Um, and then we'll kind of like at the end, we'll compare that with the kind of top down data flow that you're used to using um, in React with setting state and passing props. Um, so, just real quick, if you hear any like weird noises in the background, I apologize. I live I live near an airport, and my neighbor's chickens are just have a lot to say today. So just just bear with me on that. Anyway, um, so what is Redux? It's at least I guess the best way to describe it from the outset is uh, it's a library for managing application state, and that should be pretty straightforward, right? You're already experienced with uh, working with state and managing a functional user interface with React. Um, I want to expand that a little further though, just to say that um, Redux is a library for managing changes to application state, right? We don't really care much about state so much as how it's going to change. The way that we learn to approach application state and managing it well is by thinking in terms of how it's going to change over the course of an application's life cycle. Um, so just think about that for right now. Um, Keep that in the back of your mind. Um, but first, let's just talk. Let's just answer one quick question: uh, why do you need it? When do you need it? Do you even need Redux to build applications? And the short answer is no. You don't need Redux to build uh, working React applications. Um, in the same way that we're taking a gradual approach to Redux and we're just taking things a piece at a time, I found that like the my move towards learning Redux was a gradual one as well. Like the need like Redux is a really good answer to a challenging question that you will encounter as you build stuff in React. That question being like, how do I manage this state mess that I'm in? You know, it gets difficult at certain points in time to like know which which should be the parent component and like should this um, when should this lifecycle hook take place, like this and that. How do I pass this prop to this component if it's not a child component of this parent component, and so on and so forth. It gets pretty difficult. So if you've ever felt that, if you've ever been frustrated and felt like things were like getting to be a bit of a pain, Redux is an excellent answer to that question. need that you are experiencing. And that 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 need was actually what inspired the author of Redux to create it in the first place. Um, he Dan Abramov is his name. He kind of took cues from Flux, um, w- which was a which was the like data management framework that Facebook introduced to go along with React. He took that, and then he also took cues from a really nice functional programming language called Elm. Elm is a functional programming language for creating uh, web-based user interfaces. It compiles to JavaScript. Um, as far as these two things go, I would say you don't need to know Flux to start learning how to use Redux. I've never used Flux really. I've looked at it a little bit, but I've just been putting my time into learning Redux because that's enough of a time commitment as it is. And most people that have used Flux in the past have since moved on to using Redux because it's just better in a lot of ways. However, Elm is definitely worth checking out. I I've been picking it up a little bit alongside my other stuff that I'm doing, and it will really help with Redux for one thing because like there's this model view update kind of circle of life that Elm uses for creating responsive user interfaces, and that's exactly the model that Redux follows, just with some different terminology. It will also help you think in a completely different way about how you write programs, because it's a pure functional language. It it looks and behaves differently from the kind of classic imperative style of writing JavaScript that we're all used to. So definitely worth checking out. It's very, very cool. Um, okay, so with that, let's go back to what I said just a second ago. Redux is a library for managing changes to application state, because we don't care about how we manage state if it's not helping us expect how our state is going to change, right? That's what an application state is for in the first place. It's supposed to be changed. So that phrase to me carries two implications. One, an application state starts at nothing. We start with an initial state. That is, we start with the default set of data that's going to be um, displayed in our application, and then later on it's updated. So it goes from nothing to something. All right. So just to clarify, state goes from nothing to something, right? So so already, like, okay, we're thinking of state in terms of uh, how it's going to change, and even beyond that, how the fact that it will change. So state goes from nothing to something. State is something that we should think about as an expression of change over time in in the span of our application's life cycle. Okay, so the second part of the second implication is that um, Redux provides a simple, just very JavaScript based model for describing the nothing. Okay, so like where nothing, you know, is just initial state, right? So like we said before, nothing is just the default that we start with, and then the something equals something. The something that we move towards is a description of state, just with changes applied. So like described initial state. Okay. So why am I harping on this described thing so much? This is because Redux um, Redux takes from a style of like mostly functional programming, but it's I guess the better word would be declarative programming. Like I said a second ago, like the classic form we're used to is imperative programming, like with jQuery, where you are telling this this selected element to append this list of these elements, and you are making an API call, an AJAX request that gets this data, and then once it does, you again like affirmatively tell this other element to do this with that data. And so you're kind of like in the imperative style, you're kind of like ordering around your state and ordering around the UI of your app. Um, declarative A declarative style is not quite as handsy as that. Declarative programming is much more about just declaring declaring your application and then describing how it's going to change. And those verbs are interchangeable, by the way. You are describing your application and then declaring how it's going to change. Okay. You don't need to go like study up on Wikipedia or anything to like and know every nuance of every semantic nuance of the differences between imperative and declarative programming. But it is it's a nice thing to keep in mind as we go along. And for that matter, it's one benefit of learning Redux too. It's a really great introduction to thinking declaratively about your programs. Um, um, it, okay. So beyond that, we've already said that the way the initial nothing state becomes a something state is when it's updated. Like you already know that. Let's reiterate that the update itself, like the actual like changes to the state that come into your state, are actually descriptions of the application's state. Okay, so we've touched on those, and the key takeaway here is that an update to an application state should model the application state and just describe differences that should take place when we want to make use of the update. All right. So moving forward, these updates themselves are called actions. Okay. So let's look at a quick example. You see these other terms down here, and I promise we'll get to those. Let's just look at this really good drawing that I found by Andre Staltz, who's a super smart guy. You should go look him up, about the data flow in Redux. Okay, so just start at the bottom, like with this stuff at the bottom here. We have like a UI, and there's a user there who clicks or mouses over some kind of event on the view provider. So this is like the interface that you've created in your app. These user interactions, what's the word I'm looking for? Trigger. Yeah, that's it. Jeez. Trigger actions that are then sent to our store, or that so store broadly defined is just like everything encompassing our application state. Store is like Redux talk for application state. Again, the state is something we described in the first place. We declared what state was from the get-go of our application. When our application boots up, it will take an initial state that we described and prepare for that state to be modified. The way the state is actually modified by actions is through these things, reducers. And reducers indeed are just pure functions. They do nothing more than take in a state object, the initial state, as their first argument, and then they take in actions as their second argument. So like you can think of like state 1 and actions 2. Okay, they read in actions and catch actions by different types. So they look at the action, they see if the action has a type associated with it, and based on that type, they're able to return a new description of state. So they spit out a new description of state, and then once state is updated and it's hooked into React, it will trigger a re-render because React knows that it's getting some new data and has to re-render. You might be wondering, why is state right here? Like, why isn't it over here? If we need state to, like state should be where everything starts in our application. Well, that's a good question, and one that I asked myself when I looked at this example. However, even though store and reducers are like split up as far as the terminology goes, you can't have one without the other. All right, because a reducer, again, all it does is take a description of state and an action and returns a new version of state. And that version of state, here's the kicker, doesn't have to change state at all. By default, reducers have to just return state. So they would take in initial state and return the initial state. That's the minimum function they can serve. So in a sense, you can kind of visualize, like, in parentheses, initial state going right here, and then state also going right here. So I guess that's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind, is that reducers and stores are the reducer and the store are codependent. They can't really do anything without one another. So with that, we've really covered all of the core concepts of Redux. It may feel like a lot of information just got thrown at you, and I don't usually like to do that, but I wanted to in the case of Redux, just to illustrate how simple it is. If you can follow along with this picture, you've pretty much got the core concepts down. That's all there is to Redux. And the reason I threw it all at you is just to illustrate how simple it is. Conceptually simple it is. So we'll leave off here. The last thing I want to mention that will both serve as a starting point to think about Redux versus how you think about React is just talk about how like a major benefit of Redux as compared to using React. In React, you're already well aware that you manage data by setting state in components. You have like a parent component that contains other components, and then those components might contain components, and so on and so forth. And that's like a top-down data flow that you're already used to. and it's only two ways, up or down, you know, um, and that works great for like for some like more minimal applications, but it gets tricky if you need to like pass data sideways, you know, so like you need a you need a to do component to be able to pass props like laterally over toward like another like a comment box or something like that, you know, like a comment in a comment box that you've created. So you have like a to-do list with like a list of comments that users can leave on the to-do list, and you need to be able to pass them over between one another. It gets hard to do after a while, but Redux Redux doesn't Redux is not aware of anything on the React side. It doesn't. That is to say, it's not coupled with React by design, which is why you can use Redux in Angular or in just plain. You can even use Redux in jQuery if you wanted to. I think I don't know. Like Redux all just sits there and provides a state and waits for changes to occur. So in that sense, you can take data from the store and put it into any React application just by importing one React binding. It's called connect, that connects the Redux store to the React application. And connect will just take data from the store and map it over to that component's props, right? So in the overwrought to-do list example I just mentioned a second ago, it wouldn't be a problem to carry the same data from a deeply nested to-do component to a deeply nested comment box component, because all you do is just take it from the Redux store, which is sitting in one sense directly outside of your React application. So that's really the last point, I guess, is that Redux lets React be React while you worry about managing data state, like the state of your application throughout its lifecycle. All right, so next time what we're going to do is we're going to start from scratch. We're going to write some code, read some errors, and gradually turn our example that we're going to build into a React app. We're going to start just with some super basics. We're not even going to build React components quite yet. We're just going to use React DOM to render data from our store to the browser. We're going to break some stuff. We're going to look at some errors. We're going to see how to fix those errors. It's the best way to learn. Redux is so well written, and there's a lot of really nice knowledge you can gain from reading the comments that are left in the source code. So I'll see you there.